Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, three potential Timberwolves draft picks. Could be pick 27, could be pick 37, but players that are routinely being mocked to Minnesota. We'll talk about Juan Nunez. We'll talk about Cam Christie of the Golden Gophers, University of Minnesota, and also Terrence Shannon Jr., also a Big Ten player. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, they're pretty wound down at this point. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. And the draft is this week, Wednesday night, round one, Thursday night, round two. The Timberwolves have the 27th pick in round one. They have the the sixth pick or seventh pick of the second round, number 37 on Thursday, number 37 overall. So we're going to knock out three more draft profiles today, planning to do probably three more on Tuesday. And then Wednesday, I'll give my final big board of players that I've covered. My favorite picks for the Wolves, both at 27 and 37, of course, not knowing exactly who will be available. That's the trick with the end of the first round. But that's what we'll do here this week. I was doing two a day, middle of last week to the end of the week, but now I just want to knock out as many as I can. So I'm going to do essentially a segment on each guy we're going to talk about today. A couple of Big Ten players, an international player, a Golden Gopher. So lots to get to here today on the show. A big thank you off the top, though, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon at Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right. So the Timberwolves are the number 27 pick on Wednesday night. And the way I started the series middle of last week was going through various mock drafts and just kind of picking and choosing. Well, let's say it this way. I just kind of took all the major mock drafts and then was looking at players that were most often mocked to Minnesota or around where Minnesota's picking. And that kind of has steered me towards certain players that I'm covering here. I also am going to make sure that I mention some guys that I like beyond that, who may or may not even be frequently mocked to Minnesota. But last week we talked about some guys who, go back and listen to those shows. I'm forgetting which day. I think Wednesday or Thursday, we did Baylor Shireman from Creighton. We also did Johnny Furphy from Kansas late last week. We did Tyler Kolek from Marquette. We did Keyshawn. Keyshawn George from Miami, University of Miami. So lots of guys that we've covered so far. Today, there's three players I want to get to. I want to start with a player who I think is more likely to be there at 37 for Minnesota, or at least they would draft at 37. But I keep seeing him mentioned as a sleeper and also have seen him mentioned as a potential Wolves target. So I want to spend the first segment here talking about Juan Nunez. Juan Nunez is from Spain. He played in Germany this last year. And there are some question marks about if he really long-term wants to be in the NBA. And that is, I think, important to consider, certainly. But what's most intriguing about him is his size. He's a point guard. Is his size and his passing ability. I'm going to read a little excerpt from Jonathan Giovanni, the draft expert at ESPN. It's an ESPN Plus article where he talks about one sleeper at each position to pay attention to. Coincidentally, two of them are players we're going to talk about today. One is this player, Juan Nunez. The other is the Golden Gopher, Cam Christie, we're going to talk about here in a little bit. So Nunez, I'm just going to read what he says here because I think this is important. He says, how much does he even really want to play in the NBA? Some teams say their intel indicates he might be content spending the rest of his career as a EuroLeague star at home in Spain, where he could live a comfortable life. His aloof, at times disinterested body language certainly doesn't help perceptions in that regard. That, to me, I'm ending the quote now from the excerpt. To me, that's the biggest problem with him. On the court, I really like him as an NBA prospect. He's big. He's 6'4". He's got a wingspan of greater than 6'6". He's got he's also got a built-up frame. Like size-wise, he's similar height and wingspan to, say, Ricky Rubio. Easy comparison, of course. Spanish, the question marks about coming over. Now, he's nowhere near as, obviously, ballyhooed a prospect as Rubio was. Rubio was a lottery pick. He was thought of as a top, 5, 6, 8 pick in the draft that year, and 2009 or whatever it was. And Nunez is being seen as a late first-round, early second-round pick, but his feel for the game is similar. And he's got a bigger frame. Rubio was rail thin when he was being talked about as a draft prospect, and Nunez already is kind of built out. His size and feel are really crazy. And those are the exact reasons the Wolves could have interest with him at 37. He's got a really good frame for the NBA. And his pick and roll creation is really, really impressive. And he can make any pass. His understanding of timing, of spacing, of when to make the pass, of transition passing, half court passing, you name it, he can do it. And the size means that he'll be okay defensively. He's not great one-on-one. In fact, he was getting beat off the dribble, I don't want to say frequently, but it was a problem at times in Europe. And that's obviously going to be an issue then in the NBA. But because of his size, you don't necessarily have to have him guarding point of attack. You can somewhat hide him in a similar way to what the Wolves have done with Mike Conley at times, to try and have him guard the least lethal, or at least the least likely to attack off the dribble of the perimeter wing and guard options for the opponent. But because he's so big, he's bigger than obviously, actually, he's pretty similarly sized to Mike Conley. I think he's a little bit bigger. And because he's such a smart player, such a heady player, such an intelligent player, that combined with his size means you can probably play him off the ball against a 2 or 3 on the other team that doesn't have the ball in their hands a ton. And he's going to make the right choice as a team defender. He's also not a very good shooter, which is concerning. He did end up shooting 36% from 3 this year in 14 games for the team he was on in Europe, in the Euro Cup. For his career professionally, going back about 2.5, 3 years, he's about 35% from 3. He's been kind of up and down. The shot doesn't look really smooth. He's also not a great free throw shooter, which is a bit of a red flag. He's under 60% from the free throw line. Relatively limited opportunities. Like, we're talking less than 100 total attempts over the last few years. Remember, the seasons are much shorter over there, and he's still very young. I really should have said that off the top. He's like, I don't even think he's 20 yet, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see if I can find it real quick. He's right around 20, but I'm not sure he's there yet. Yeah, he just turned 20. 6'4", like I said, 6'4" with a wingspan of over 6'6". So the concern is shooting touch. Some of his shots, in the paint look smooth. Smooth is maybe overstating it. Comfortable, because he's such a good player. And he puts such good touch on his passes. And Rubio had that too early on. Like, his layup package was pretty good, and he could finish through contact given his size. I think Nunez can do all of that. I worry about him developing an outside shot at all. And it's palatable for him to be an NBA player without one, but he has to do other stuff well. He has to become a better defender. He has to be legitimately as good of a creator on the ball in the US as he has been in Europe. So I think he profiles as a backup point guard. I think there's reasons why we could see Tim Connelly being interested. Obviously, Connelly's looking for a backup point guard. Big guards matter to him. Size, in terms of point guards on Tim Connelly's roster, really matters to him, and they need somebody to be Mike Conley's backup. I think the upside is a little bit limited. If he does develop a jumper, if he develops an outside shot, then he could be a starter at the NBA level, but I think he's more of a solid backup. The other thing, Tim Connelly brought in Facundo Campazzo. Remember the Brazilian, Argentinian. I believe he was Argentinian. Yeah, he's from Argentina. I don't want to get that wrong. I'm going to make sure. Argentinian. He brought him into Denver. And obviously he didn't exactly have the career that they wanted him to there, but he was fine for a period of time there. And he was a player that was seen as a potential backup point guard solution, and much smaller. This is obviously a much bigger player. I'm just saying, the ability to recruit and convince foreign point guards to come to the U.S. and also have that same playmaking type flair. Again, Nunez is a half foot taller than Campazzo. There's that part's not a comparison. But Tim Connelly has thought outside the box for these type of roles, and he wants big point guards. He wants big guards, period. He wants guys that can play make for others, and Nunez can do that. I would not take him at 27. And he's being talked about as a possible first-round pick. In fact, I mentioned this, I think, on Wednesday's show last week. but Giovanni actually had him for the Wolves at 27. And I'll read the expert there real quick. In there, remember they did like a mock. Him and Jeremy Woo did like a value type draft. Like, which player do you think they should get? So Woo had taken Tyler Kolek, we talked about, I think, on Friday's show, as an option for the Wolves at 27. Giovanni said Nunez. And he says, with starting point guard Conley turning 37 in October, finding a successor to pair with Edwards in the backcourt will be a priority. Nunez has dimensions closer to an NBA wing than a point guard, but he's one of the best passers in the draft class, an absolute pick-and-roll maestro. Thanks to his outstanding creativity and feel for the game, the Wolves might feel like they could get him with their 37 pick rather than drafting him here, but there might not be many great point guard options available in the second round. I should also point out the Wolves are one of two teams that Nunez has worked out for, and he's already back overseas, prepping for his season there. So he has worked out for Minnesota. So we know that they have interest. Conley has a track record of drafting, of acquiring foreign point guards, and of leaning on big wings and guards. And clearly they want somebody who can run the offense, with the bench unit. So I would not take him at 27, as Giovanni says. I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. But if he's there at 37, I think you could take a shot. He is only 20, and I think the upside's relatively limited. So it's a bit of a swing, and we'll see where he lands in my final big board on Wednesday. But all that to say, Nunez will be there at 27. There's a shot he's there at 37 as well. All right. Next, we're going to talk about Golden Gopher, Cam Christie. We're going to very, very possibly see the first Gophers player to be drafted in the first round in quite some time. So we'll talk about Cam Christie here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? If so, no doubt you have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. Instead, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, let's talk Cam Christie. So Cam was a one and done at Minnesota, and of course, his brother Max plays for the Lakers and had played at Michigan State and was a second round pick. Cam Christie, I don't want to say he came out of nowhere, but he was a 3-star recruit and came on really strong as the year went on at Minnesota. He averaged for the year 11 points per game, but again, got much better as the year went on. Was 39% from three, finished just a shade over 40% from the floor. And maybe the primary concern with Cam Christie, I guess to start with a weakness, would be scoring in the paint. Perhaps lacking the physicality needed to play at the NBA level, but almost everything else is pretty NBA ready. And at first it's like, okay, too often I'm just like mini soapbox here about territorialism. Minnesota fans want them to draft Minnesota players if there's actually any Minnesota players that are good. And that makes sense, right? At first I had that kind of like, I think he's too raw. I watched, a fair amount of Gophers this year as the season was ongoing. And I thought to myself, like, he's a really good shooter. I didn't think he was NBA ready. I thought he should take another year with the Gophers. I obviously understand why he came out. But after spending a little bit more time digging into some of the numbers and how much he improved and some of the different draft profiles out there, I actually kind of like Cam Christie as a potential Wolves pick, even at 27. So the profile in Cam Christie is 6'6". He's got a wingspan that's legit 6'8". Really, really good catch and shoot player. I already said he was over 39% from outside the arc. He was actually 93rd percentile in college in terms of catch and shoot. He had a 64% effective field goal percentage on catch and shoot opportunities this season. Really, really good catch and shoot player. But overall, as a shooter, it's not just catch and shoot. He can shoot off the dribble. He's very fluid. He's a really good movement shooter. Like if you want to run pin downs for him, he gets his balance and his shot release is so, again, I'll use the word fluid. That's when if I could describe Cam Christie in one word, and maybe I should be doing this for every player I talk about, fluid is the one that comes to mind. He just looks very comfortable and fluid in himself, in his own body, with the ball in his hands as a shooter. And there's not this massive track record of him as like a sharpshooter because he only played 1 year at college and wasn't even a starter at the very beginning of the year. I get it, but I think he could be a legit sharpshooter at the NBA level. He's very fluid and comfortable and can shoot from all different platforms and angles, and gets his balance, gets his feet under him very quickly off of pin downs. Just coming around screens and knocking down jumpers from the elbows, from outside the arc, from above the break was very impressive, both off the dribble and catch and shoot this year. I was very impressed with him as a shooter this season. I also think the other thing that really impressed me with him is overall in transition and with the ball in his hands, his instincts. The assist rate doesn't jump off the charts, doesn't jump off the page, I guess. But it was, nearly 14%. And for a Gophers team that Elijah Hawkins was one of the best assist guys in the country this year. And so there weren't that many assists to go around, and Christie was scoring a lot. But he had a usage rate that was sub 20%. Again, freshman didn't play a ton early in the season. Assist rate was 13.8%, which is solid. Turnover rate was only 10%, which is good. The overall feel and instincts for Cam Christie, again, I think comfortable or fluid is a good word. Seems very comfortable in his own skin. In the open floor, knew what to do. Athletic enough to attack, and certainly big enough to attack in transition, attack at the rim, to pull up and shoot. Sometimes that decision-making was a little shaky, but again, freshman. I think that he immediately could step in and be probably a terror in transition because of the size and athleticism, ability to finish at the rim in transition, and ability to shoot threes both off the dribble, off the catch, and create for others. For all those reasons, I think he can immediately be an effective transition piece at the NBA level. And overall, as a ball handler, I mentioned the assist to turnover, which is solid. He was actually 84th percentile in the NCAA this year in terms of pick and roll ball handling. He averaged 1 point per possession this year, which is solid. He was making the right choices, and this is with some limited options around him with the Gophers. He had a lot of assists to Parker Fox, kind of the also limited big, bouncy big for the Gophers, and a lot of just kind of slip screens, dump off passes, alley oops on the baseline to Fox in the dunker spot, stuff like that Christie did a bunch of, which again is good instincts, good overall feel for the game. For somebody, he's not a point guard. He's not going to run the offense at the NBA level, but it shows a fuller picture, a fuller understanding of how an offense is supposed to run. And again, the comfort level and the fluidity with which he did that is very impressive. So it's a well-rounded game. Defensively, he's pretty good. I would say he's inconsistent. It's funny, like there's some sites like the Ringer has him. Actually, no. Where did I see that? Somewhere had him like listed as like a strong defender, but I think to me that's a bit of a question mark. I think he's a solid defender, but he's got the size and, again, enough athleticism to be a legit plus defender. I don't know that he's there yet. I would say his length and again, effort level and understanding overall intelligence, basketball IQ, that is there. So I think he could step in and be a solid, a neutral defender immediately, but the size is what kind of makes that maybe more impactful. And also certainly there's upside there. And Max Christie, like, I don't know how much, I think it's a little silly sometimes when we say like, oh, well, his brother did this, because I mean, they're different people, but his brother became a better defender as a pro than he was thought to be as a prospect. And if that's the case with Cam, he already does so much offensively. You're looking at a guy who immediately could be a 3-and-D type player with far greater upside. Like, I truly believe he's got starter level, if not better, upside. And the Wolves aren't necessarily looking for that in this draft. They're not necessarily looking for they're not trying to take a home run swing. But I think he immediately can be a solid player. And along the way, I talked about Baylor Shireman the other day, last week. He's at the moment maybe my favorite pick if he's on the board at 27, because I think he's pretty plug and play. I actually think Cam Christie's pretty plug and play too. You're talking about a limited role, and he's not going to, again, initiate the offense for you off the bench. You're going to cobble that together. If he's the pick, it's going to be Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and it's going to be some combination of whoever the backup, Monte Morris or Jordan McLaughlin, with Alexander Walker I doubt you can bring back Kyle Anderson, but if they do, like, you don't necessarily need somebody to play make off the bench. But Christie can, he's got legit two-way potential as a 3-and-D guy immediately with upside of a starter plus. Would be my take on Cam Christie. And, who knows what that looks like down the road for Minnesota for the Timberwolves. But I think he immediately could be an impactful NBA player. And I think is really intriguing. I mean, he's one of my favorite prospects in this draft. And he could go late lottery. I wouldn't be shocked if a team was like, look, we think he's got starter upside. This is a draft. There aren't so many guys that actually have that have that bigger upside. We'll take him. I do want to know, I said he's 6'6". He measured without shoes at like 6'4.5". So he's probably more like 6'5 plus is, my guess he'll be listed at 6'5". I overstated it maybe a little, but he's in the 6'5 to 6'6 range with shoes with a 6'8 wingspan. So really good size. Again, good enough athleticism and length. Like, I don't know. Like, my concern is really just related to how he handles contact on both ends of the floor, physicality. That's the biggest thing. And I think the scoring in the paint will come. He's good in transition. He's got good feel, again, good instincts. So it's really just, can he withstand the rigors of the NBA season, and can he be physical enough on both ends to be successful immediately in the NBA? And I think the answer is yes. I think he's already he could be a rotation guy from day one with the upside of starter or better at the NBA level. All right. So I like him at 27. If the Wolves if Nunez is on the board at 37, I like him as an option there. Christie, I'd consider at 27. Again, I'll give my full big board Wednesday, and I'll kind of rank everybody that we've talked about. I want to close today by talking about Terrence Shannon Jr. of University of Illinois. That's how we'll close the show here today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, of course, hockey ending, the finals over in the NBA, we get fewer games. This is kind of that time of year where it gets a little bit dead. The sports aren't sportsing like we want them to, but FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And look, lots of baseball ongoing. That's really the only sport going right now. You've got WNBA action. You've got baseball. College baseball is winding down as well in the next couple of days, but MLB. There's lots of good stuff over at FanDuel. This summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, let's close this out by talking about Terrence Shannon Jr. of the University of Illinois. And of course, the big story surrounding him was the sexual assault allegations that were made against him, and an incident that allegedly happened last fall, and a court case was brought, or he was charged in December, recently got cleared up in the last week. He was found not guilty. I'm talking about him on the court. Obviously, whatever team decides to draft Terrence Shannon Jr. is going to do their due diligence on the story overall. University of Illinois felt comfortable enough, which is maybe a weird word to use, but with how it was resolved, that they're actually adding him to their Ring of Honor, or whatever it's called, at University of Illinois. Usually you have to be an All-American, but because of pending charges, he wasn't able to win All-American. But the AD at University of Illinois came out the other day and said, look, he would have been, was it not for these charges, which he was found not guilty of recently, cleared of all charges, and they're going to put him in their Ring of Honor. So for whatever that's worth, whatever NBA team does decide to draft him will no doubt do their due diligence and feel good about making that selection, or be comfortable with how things ended up with him legally. So I'm going to talk about him in terms of as a prospect. That can't really, the off-court stuff for me as I evaluate this and his potential fit with Minnesota. I'm not going to factor that into what we're talking about here for the rest of the show today. So Terrence Shannon Jr. played 3 years at Texas Tech, transferred to Illinois, and dramatically improved when he was with Illinois. A lot more opportunity, played a lot more period. Like, he just saw more minutes. First year at Illinois, he was only 32% from 3. Last year, he was 36% and averaged 23 points per game, nearly 48% from the floor. He is an NBA prospect because he just looks the part. And obviously production, you average 23 a game in the Big Ten. With the body type he has, you're going to be a first round prospect. 6'7" wing, his wingspan is nearly 6'9". His body is NBA ready. The size, the length, the frame that he has, he absorbs contact really well on both ends of the floor. So really, in that sense, the frame he has is the opposite of what I was just talking about with Cam Christie last segment. He's really great in transition. That's where he's most impressive, is in transition. I think that Shannon's immediately going to be a kind of wreak havoc in transition at the NBA level. I think that defensively, he might be a little bit overrated at this point. I think he's maybe a little on the small side to be as, I think he's extremely athletic, which is going to help. And he's certainly not small, but I think it seems like his defense is being overstated a little bit. And I don't know that he's a good enough 3-point shooter. Remember, he was 32% his second to last year at college. And overall for his career in college, he's under 35%. And his best year was 38%. And he played less games that year. Last year was just 36%. So I wouldn't call him a 3-and-D guy. I would call him like a, what's the best comp? I don't know. I'm just trying to think of, like, there's some things offensively. He reminds me of Jalen Noel. He's a little bigger than Jalen Noel, and he plays with more explosion than Jalen Noel did, but there's something about his offensive game, like put his head down and go, relatively limited assist rate. Like he can pass the basketball, and he's got some good clips out there with passing the ball. But I think his offensive upside is maybe a little bit limited. He doesn't look great when he puts the ball on the floor. I think that he's not a creator in the half court. He's not a consistent scorer with the ball on the floor, but he's an absolute terror in transition. He's a solid defender. He's got a good steal rate. It's consistency. Offensively with the ball in his hands, consistency, and defensively consistency. It seems like the steal rate continued to decrease at Illinois. His last season, his steal rate was only 1.7%, and it was 2.3 in his first year at Illinois. And actually, every year prior to that, he was over 2% steal rate, just 1.7 this year. And shot more threes, got to the rim a little bit less often. Again, very good at the rim, but a lot of that's in transition. So I think he's an NBA rotation guy. I think he's going to be an off the bench energy guy who's perhaps kind of a neutral defender at first. You could put him out there. You could probably guard 3 positions. I like him as a prospect overall. I think he's got limited upside. Like, I like the Cam. I think it's likely, I shouldn't say likely, certainly possible Shannon gets drafted ahead of Cam Christie, and it's possible he's a more impactful rotation guy right away. And maybe even year 2, he looks better. But I think Cam Christie's got a better long-term projection. I think he could turn into a legit starter plus player. I don't know that Shannon becomes more than a borderline starter. I think the upside is relatively limited. He did a lot of this damage in transition. And again, a 5th-year senior, right? A grad senior with Illinois. So I think he's probably a late first-round pick. I kind of think Christie goes ahead of him. And I don't know that I'd take Shannon at 27 if I was Minnesota. I'd be shocked if he was still there at 37. But because I do think he's a plug-and-play, like, 9th guy, no matter who you are, no matter what team you are. He can come out there, play hard defensively, turn the opponent over, get out in transition, knock down an open 3, dunk on someone in transition, give you a jolt energy-wise. And as long as he brings it defensively, which is one of the criticisms of him, is that I mentioned the steal rate, but that the effort wasn't always there late in his Illinois career. On the defensive end of the floor, it wasn't consistent. If he can maintain that intensity and jump passing lanes and get steals and ignite the break and be good in transition and knock down open 3s when he gets the chance, and not, the turnover rate was fine. Like, it was actually really good this year, under 10%. Part of that's because he shot the ball so much. He also, assist rate dropped as well this year. I just think there's like a narrow, like, it's a high floor, low ceiling. I don't say low ceiling, modest ceiling. I'm going to say high floor, modest ceiling. I think his floor is like fringe rotation guy, 10th player, and his ceiling is probably borderline starter. I don't know that there's much more than that. I don't know that there's much worse than that. And there's something to be said for that player. Like, I think he'll be effective. And, we'll see again when I do my full big board. I say full big board. It's going to be 10, 12 guys on Wednesday for picks for the Wolves at 27 or 37. He'll be on there. Like, I would be fine with the Wolves taking him. But I don't know, like, he's probably ahead of Nunez in my mind, but I don't know that I put him ahead of Cam Christie. I'm not going to put him ahead of Shireman. Like, I just think what he does is going to be a limited enough impact, and there's a narrow enough range of outcomes. It's just, I wouldn't get all that excited about Terrence Shannon. He's a nice prospect, and I think he'll be effective from day one at the NBA level. He's just not my favorite pick for Minnesota, because what he does is a more explosive, like, in a lot of ways, a more explosive version of what the Wolves asked Nickeil Alexander-Walker to do. And Nickeil Alexander-Walker has a few years of NBA experience. We know he's a knockdown 3-point shooter, better shooter than Shannon. We know he's a better ball handler and better playmaker for others. He can initiate offense. I don't think Shannon's going to do that at the NBA level, at least not the first couple of years. Shannon may be a little more explosive overall and maybe a little bit more, big, exciting plays, defense into offense. But the Wolves don't need redundancy there when they've already got a better version, if you will. They're not the same player. It's not a real comp. I'm not saying he is the Alexander Walker, but that would be the role he would take with Minnesota. Otherwise, I don't know what he does for you. So Shannon's fine. I don't love him at 27. He won't be there at 37. That's kind of where I'm at with Terrence Shannon Jr. All right. Tuesday, I'm going to do 3 more players, and we'll see where we are if I feel like I need to get to anybody else. But I've done, 2, 4, I'll have done 10, I guess, through Tuesday. I'll see if there's anybody else I need to add, but we'll do at least 10 on a big board. I'll rank those players on Wednesday's show as we get you ready for the draft Wednesday night. We'll also have a Minnesota basketball party. We were off last week for Juneteenth, but we'll have a Minnesota basketball party on Wednesday. And that will also be a lot of draft talk for Wednesday night. So we'll get to that. That'll be on this feed Wednesday morning as well. All right. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. That includes YouTube. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.